Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I am your Rockies Insider, Patrick Lyons. We got to get ourselves ready for another series against a team with a winning record. Maybe the Rockies can be spoilers this weekend as they go against the Milwaukee Brewers for a trio of games in Wisconsin. And who better to talk about the Brewers than the Brewers aficionado from Just Baseball, Joey Peterson. What's going on today, buddy?
Not too much. I'm excited to talk some baseball. Should be a pretty fun series. The Brewers need to get back in the win column here. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the series this weekend.
Yeah, and I think you're getting the Rockies at probably the right time. Not doing so well against Atlanta. Usually having those struggles on the road after playing at altitude. So, as you said, despite the rough series against the Cardinals, they might be able to catch their breath just a little bit. We'll talk about the pitching matchup here in just a second, and the family connection, the family reunion for the Peraltas. But I wanted to pick your brain on just the Brewers season in general. This was a season that really got started off with Craig Counsell going to Chicago. How shocking was that, or was there any writing on the wall to suggest that he was not only going to leave, which I think maybe that could have been expected, but to go to the almost crosstown rival, cross-region rival in the Chicago Cubs?
Yeah, it definitely caused quite a bit of a dumpster fire on Brewers Twitter. Him leaving actually wasn't super surprising. People kind of thought he was just going to go to the Mets. That was kind of the shoe-in prediction. Now the Cubs, on the other hand, that was shocking. They, of course, already had a manager in place in David Ross, so it was that part. You don't really expect that. They clearly valued him. They paid him a lot of money. Things haven't gone quite Chicago's way this season. Still have a shot at the playoffs. I know they only have not too great of odds from Fangraphs projection perspective, but I think they sit 4.5 something games out of the wild card spot, so still in a fighting chance. But no, I think Pat Murphy's done absolutely wonders for this team. I think Counsell was obviously a great manager, the most winning manager in Brewers history. He did a lot of good things for the franchise, but I think something about a change in scenery and getting a new face, new philosophy, new perspective, leading the way has just kind of done wonders and given an injection of life into this team. We'll kind of talk about it later, but they've kind of embraced a new philosophy of winning. And I think that all starts with Murphy, and the club's kind of really bought into that.
Yeah, and the loss of Counsell obviously pretty critical for a guy that's at the center of the entire team, because it seems like every year the Brewers are pulling players out of nowhere, either from their system or for other clubs, and having a ton of success. Again, organizationally, they seem to do everything right. So maybe you don't need that manager, but it feels like you do need a guy in the middle of that lineup to carry the team just a little bit, to be that MVP caliber player. And there are a couple, but Christian Yelich really seemed like he was going to be that guy. And after a couple of somewhat disappointing seasons, he really looked like he was going to be back on track in 2024. And yet here he is back out again, injured. And it seems like it's just somewhat of a surprise that they've been able to not only do it with this cast of players that aren't household names, but to do it without Christian Yelich there. Is that surprising a little bit that they've been able to kind of manage to do that without, arguably their best hitter?
It is, and it also isn't. Like you mentioned earlier, the Brewers just seem to find a way no matter who they plug and play. And I think that is a testament to why they've been such a great regular season team for the last handful of years, right? They're up there with the Dodgers, the Braves, all these juggernauts with some of the most regular season wins over the last couple of years. And I think that's because they build a lineup that's not predicated on one guy. So if Christian Yelich goes out, sure, it's a huge loss. He was playing. He was an all-star this year. He was putting up, he could have been in the MVP conversation if he were to play at that level for the rest of the year. So you subtract him, and Blake Perkins, a guy most baseball fans outside of Milwaukee probably haven't heard of. He's playing elite defense in the outfield, and he's bringing fine offensive play like in the lineup. So I think they just do a really good job at having a well-rounded lineup that isn't predicated on one person. Now, if this lineup had Christian Yelich, that obviously would make it a better team, especially when you look forward to a hopeful postseason run. but it's amazing what they've been able to do, almost like seamlessly without having Yelich in the lineup, to just keep their offense churning. Their offense has been great all year long, and it hasn't really stopped in the month of August, and it's continuing in September. So that's just a testament to how well crafted their lineup it really is.
Yeah, the probable starters for the weekend as of today: Ryan Feltner against Frankie Montas, a guy who was acquired at the trade deadline. On Saturday, lefty Ty Block looks like he's going to be making his second start of the week against Tobias Myers, another one of those names people might not be familiar with. That's going to be a common theme. There's a couple more names we'll talk about later. And then on Sunday, the veterans going against each other: Kyle Freeland against Freddie Peralta. And one of the bigger storylines of the weekend, and it should be, this will be fun, is you'll have the Peraltas going against each other. Luis Peralta, who just made his debut last month with the Rockies after coming over in the Jalen Beeks trade from the Pittsburgh Pirates, and Freddie Peralta, a pair of brothers. And despite the fact that Luis Peralta will not be starting the game, it still, would be really cool to have two brothers pitching in the same game. We get that a lot with the Rogers, obviously now together with the Giants, but that certainly is a rarity, and it is going to be something fun to watch this weekend at American Family Field.
Certainly, and yeah, you got the Contreras brothers whenever the Cardinals play the Brewers. That's always a fun to see how they interact and all that. And no, it probably means the world to Freddie. He's a clubhouse leader, as thrown around as that phrase is. He really is the ace of that staff, and he always brings a good energy about him. So it's definitely going to be good vibes against the Rockies.
Yeah, Thomas Harding wrote a really great article recently about how Coors Field is a special place for the Peralta family, because it was actually my first year on the beat in 2018. And I wasn't at Coors Field that day. I was down in Colorado Springs, where the Brewers AAA affiliate was a longtime affiliate for the Colorado Rockies, but it was a Brewers affiliate, and, caught up with Corbin Burns, Brett Phillips, a couple other guys at that game in the Springs. Meanwhile, up in Denver, Freddie Peralta made the drive. It was Mother's Day, and goes out and has this, fantastic debut with his mom in the crowd and everything. And so, there's an interesting connection between the organizations, between Denver and the Peralta family. So now they'll be able to hang out together in Milwaukee. And what's the, for any Rockies fans that might not know, is there any rule of thumb as far as opening the dome versus closing it? I mean, if it's raining, you're going to have it closed. Are there any odd wrinkles? I know at Chase Field, they can't really open or close the roof with fans in the building because there are some issues with that. I don't know if they're able to do that in Milwaukee or not, but what's the typical rule of thumb for what to expect in September with that retractable roof?
Yeah, usually weather dependent. Yeah, they've opened it mid-game before. It can get pretty darn toasty in there. If it's a packed house and it's on a warm day, roof's closed, it's going to get nice and toasty. So no, they try to keep it open as much as possible. If there's no rain in the forecast, that roof's going to be open. If it's a nice day, it's going to be open. So fortunate to have the capability to close it, obviously, but they usually try to have it open as much as possible.
Yeah, I had to look this up, and I know the Rockies, they don't go with the opener strategy. I mean, if they were to do something like that, it would certainly be on Saturday and Ty Block start, not Sunday and Freddie start. But I had to look it up because I'm curious about all kinds of strange information and fun facts. But believe it or not, it hasn't been, it's been 15 years. It hasn't been since 2009 that two brothers have pitched against each other in the same game. The Weaver brothers, Jared and Jeff Weaver, in 2009. It's only happened 21 times by only 8 different sets of brothers. So maybe in the future at some point, Luis Peralta, he's a relief pitcher, but someday maybe that'll happen. Someday maybe they'll be on the same team. I think, according to what I researched, the Brewers have never had a set of brothers on the team at the same time. I don't know how deep your Brewers, history knowledge goes, but I've not come across that. I don't think they've ever had that before.
That checks out. Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of a pair that would have come up. That definitely, yeah. That's fascinating.
The Rockies don't have that either. The closest they have is cousins. Nolan Arenado and his cousin Josh Fuentes would have been the only pair. You also have one of the storylines this weekend, and we'll see. I don't think it'll get a ton of play, but if you're watching the pregame and postgame, Pat Murphy and Bud Black together again. They were there in San Diego, and Pat, when they were in Denver, really spoke highly of Bud Black. In fact, he even brought it up in the media scrum in his office in the Brewers clubhouse, saying, "Hey, does anybody want to ask me about Bud Black?" Had nothing but wonderful things to say about him, helping him get one of his first opportunities, as a coach, coming from those college ranks at ASU, and then managing to cross over on a big league staff. So they've got a really good relationship. And Pat Murphy is one of those guys when we talk about, here in September, the end of the year award races and who's going to get some MVP votes, Cy Young Award. Pat Murphy, I think, has been one of those guys. What have you seen from him in regards to being, manager of the year, possibly in the National League, and taking this team that, again, not a ton of people they're going to be able to run off, and the Tobias Myers, the Brewer Hinklen of the world. Like, who are these guys? Pat Murphy, he's at the front. He's the tip of the spear when it comes to getting these Brewers in first place in the NL Central.
Yeah, I might be biased, but I think he's very deserving of manager of the year. I don't think many people outside of Milwaukee's clubhouse thought that they'd be in this position. They were projected to take a big step back for rightful reasons. It's not like it was an outlandish prediction to think that they were going to come back from their step down from their 92 game win season a year ago because they lost so many starters, just because it was a new manager. There was David Stearns left to go to New York. So there was just a lot of turnover. People expected them to take a step back. And I think they're arguably a better team this year. They might not have the star power than the dominance, but I think they're a more well-rounded team. And I think the club, like I mentioned earlier, Murph just has a leadership quality to him. And I think the player, he's been around the Brewers clubhouse for a while. It's not like he's brand new to the organization. So that certainly helps. The players are familiar with him. The players are familiar with the way he talks, interacts with the players. He's a very player-friendly manager. And as you mentioned, their relationship, he's a very respectable guy. He has as much as respect for anybody out there as anybody. So it's just having him lead that clubhouse to the position that they're in today. I think, the Brewers might be the first team to clinch their division in baseball this year, which part of that is their dominance. Part of that is also the NL Central relatively underperforming this year. But you got to give credit to the Brewers for taking advantage of that weak division, because there were times last year where the opportunity was there for them to run away with it and they just couldn't really grasp it. So I think that's different this year. And I think that it all starts with Murphy.
That would be an interesting thing to research, like the first team that clinches their division. How does that manager do in the manager of the year award voting? I don't think that's the be all end all, because the Dodgers were in that position right now. Even if they clinch the division by August 31st, I think there's a ton of people say, well, Dave Roberts has a really good team. So, that doesn't really mean anything. But in this instance for the Brewers, I definitely think it does. And, talking about the end of year award voting, in your eyes, is Willy Adames the team's MVP? Will he finish ahead of a William Contreras? Because it felt like early on in the season, with that early success that the Brewers were having, that it was William Contreras kind of as the MVP guy. But over the last month plus, Willy Adames has come on strong. You talk about being a first guy in the National League with 100 RBI. People need to pay attention to Willy Adames, especially because he's going to be a free agent after this year. For you, is Willy Adames the team MVP, or is it William Contreras, or is it somebody else?
I think it's Adames. Contreras is playing like an MVP for the first 2 months of the season, an MOP of the league, not just the team, but he was putting up some of the best numbers in baseball. Now, granted, he's still playing well. His performance has not quite been MVP caliber for the last couple of months, but Willie, man, he's gotten even better for over the last month of baseball. I'm sure that the stat's been going around social media. He just tied Ken Griffey Jr. for the most 3-run home runs in a single season at 13. Anytime you put your name in with Ken Griffey Jr., that holds some weight and that has some importance. But he's done exactly what he is needed to for this lineup. In the years like you look at last year, he still put up a 4+ win season because he was playing good defense. He was hitting home runs. He could still drive the ball. But when he wasn't slugging, he was kind of not bringing much value. His average was down. He was striking at a high rate. He was chasing. This year, he's just completely become a more well-rounded hitter for what this offense needs. He's cut down his chase rate. He's striking out at the lowest rate of his entire career. He's walking more than he ever has. His chase rate's down. It's still high, but it's down. But when he's putting the ball in play, he's making much more higher quality of contact. So he's just, I don't think there's a more valuable player. Plus, he's playing every single day at shortstop for the Brewers. That is extremely valuable for a team that's relatively young on the infield. I mean, you got Joey Ortiz, who's a rookie. You got a first baseman who's fluctuating between Hoskins and Bowers, who are not rookies by any stretch. They have played in this league, but new to the organization. You got Bryce Trang at second, who's a second-year guy. So just having that consistency at shortstop. Now, he plays really good defense. It's been spotty at times this year, but overall, he's a good defender. Just having that in the lineup, plus what he brings to the batting order is you can't replicate it. And as you mentioned, he's a free agent this offseason. If I were a betting man, I would bet that he's not going to be in Milwaukee moving forward, which is unfortunate. So I think Brewers fans need to appreciate what he's given us in his best season of his career so far, in a season which the Brewers all of a sudden have World Series aspirations, and he would be a huge part of that. And I don't think they'd be there without what he's done, you know?
Well, that you read my mind. That was going to be my question about what Adames' future is. But I mean, you win a World Series, that puts a lot of extra money in your pocket. Maybe they do open up the checkbook to go ahead and sign someone like him. Did you think that when the Corbin Burnes trade went down and they acquired a guy that came up as a shortstop, and maybe Joey Ortiz is that next guy to take over Adames' place at shortstop, that Adames was going to be traded, or was part of the game plan? And this seems like it. If they were going to contend, then you hold on to Adames. But if not, at the trade deadline, then you can go ahead and flip him to a contender. Were you worried that, once Burnes went, Adames was going to be right after, before opening day?
I think you nailed it. I thought they were going to go into the season where if they were out of contention after the first 2 months of play, they were going to trade him, and if they were in contention, I think so. It's even funny, even leading up the month before the All-Star, the trade deadline, Brewers have held the division lead since April. So they've been in first place for a while. There were still rumors of like, hey, what's going to happen here? You can't really put anything past the Brewers after what they did, obviously, with Josh Hader and all that stuff a couple years ago. I didn't think he was going to get traded in the offseason, just because I think the optics of that would have been poor, and it would have looked like, hey, we're shipping it in this year. We got no shot. And I think Murphy and the clubhouse was like, no, we can compete this year. And Adames was going to play a big role in that. So now I didn't think the Brewers were going to be in this position. So I thought there was a chance he was going to be gone by the trade deadline. But once you started seeing like, all right, this Brewers team can compete this season, at least for a division title, I think there was no chance they were trading him. And I'm sure that that's how they felt about him as well.
Rockies fans can certainly relate. And every team is just looking on the Rockies roster going, hey, we're going to take this guy. We're going to take that guy. Now, granted, in the last couple of years, you lose 100 games twice in a row. And have 6 consecutive seasons under 460, it makes sense why teams would be looking at your roster, because you're not a contender. You're not a serious ball club that really needs those guys around. So it does make sense to a degree. But as you said, Burnes went. You don't want to totally wave the white flag, even if it might have been better for your future, depending on what offers were out there. You don't do that. Rockies had that situation after the Nolan Arenado trade during the February of 2021. They could have traded Trevor Story, another shortstop that was approaching free agency. Didn't want to wave that white flag. They ended up holding on to him. Could have moved him at the deadline. Different situation. They weren't in first place like the Brewers, but held on to him and got the draft pick. Is Joey Ortiz that next guy should Adames end up leaving? And rather, I should say, should the Brewers not win the World Series and Adames leaves? Because we'll have to put a pin in that. If they win the series, maybe Adames does come back. But if Adames ends up leaving, is Joey Ortiz that next guy, or are they going to have to go outside the organization? Is there somebody coming up in the pipeline? What's next for the Brewers there?
So originally, I thought it was going to be Joey Ortiz, but I think that they're looking at him as the third baseman of the future in Milwaukee. And I think it's going to be Bryce Terang to take over at shortstop, if I had to guess. So Terang he plays an elite second baseman. He came up as a shortstop, so he knows that position obviously very well. He moved to second base because the Brewers had Willy Adames. So if I were to guess, Terang moves over to shortstop. They have Tyler Black waiting in the pipeline who can play second base. And if I were to predict, that's what's going to be the long-term future. Now, having Joey Ortiz's capability at shortstop is certainly a big bonus. He can pick it as well as anyone too. So they have 2 very viable options who play a very high caliber defense, whether it's Ortiz or Terang. But I think it's going to be one of those 2, most likely Terang.
All right, in the series preview, got to know what's going on with the Brewers bullpen. They don't seem to be world beaters, right? Again, don't recognize a ton of the names, but the bullpen is good. Like the numbers are really great. It just doesn't strike me as being scary. It's very good, but not scary. 11 different players with a save. Trails only the Dodgers because, of course, it's the Dodgers that we're talking about here. But what is your scouting report for Rockies fans going into the series? What could they possibly expect this weekend in Milwaukee, at least before Trevor McGill gets to the save in the ninth?
Yeah, you nailed it. And I think that it's kind of the sentiment of the entire team. It's not scary, it's not dominant, but it's extremely efficient. So, I mean, they have guys where they have 4, 5, 6 guys they can turn to in high leverage situations. And whether they're not going to blow you away and strike out the side every single time, but they're going to produce outs. So, the way they've constructed their bullpen is very well rounded. And I think it really complements their starting rotation because their starters, we'll get into it, they don't really go deep into ball games. Like you'd be like Myers, you'll be happy if you get 5. Ray, who isn't pitching in this series, but Ray, 5 innings, and you can go to that strong bullpen. So you got Devin Williams, who's been nails as a closer. I mean, everyone knows Devin Williams, but like you said, Trevor McGill, just a beast of a man, 6'7", 6'8", whatever. I forgot what his height is listed as, but he has a heater of a curveball that can hit 100 miles an hour, and then a hammer of a curve to play off of that. He was the interim closer when Williams was on the shelf for the first 4 months of the season, and he was very effective in that role. Yoel Payamps, not as quite as nasty as stuff as the other guys, but he commands it well. He can get ground balls, and he can get outs when they need to. He's another high leverage reliever. Jared Koenig, a minor league free agent signing this past offseason. He's been one of their better relievers this season. He's just has a funky delivery that it almost is like he's shooting out to first base, and then the ball just fires out of his hand at 96, 97 miles an hour. So he's just another effective reliever. They got plenty of names. They got Hobie Milner, funky delivery. They got Dale Hall, who's going to be working in bulk innings. They got Joe Ross, who can be an effective reliever, who started the year as in the rotation, but now he's kind of turned into like that long reliever. So they just have so many guys that they can turn to and that they trust. And it's been huge. Like you said, but not household names, but names that can get outs when they need to and make pitches when they need to.
Joel Payamps is a household name for me because he did come up in the Rockies organization before leaving and then finally having some success. So the hardcore Rockies fans remember Joel Payamps at least a little bit. So they're kind of wishing him well for the most part. You know, you mentioned earlier Ken Griffey Jr. being in the same class as him. That has to make you think about Jackson Chourio and his NL Rookie of the Year award campaign, probably behind Jackson Merrill and Paul Skeens, but making a lot of noise. He's eventually going to reach 20 homers, already has the 20 stolen bases, and doing it at age 20. So 2020 at 20. Only 5 other players have ever reached those career numbers by before age 21. Bryce Harper, Mike Trout, Adrian Beltre, Andrew Jones, and the first, Ken Griffey Jr. He's top 20 in the NL in batting average, on-base percentage, slugging, and OPS, not just for rookies, but overall. Since June 2nd, he's behind only Shohei Ohtani and Francisco Lindor, 1 and 2 in the NL MVP conversation. In terms of OPS, where do you think he might end up finishing in the NL Rookie of the Year award voting?
So I think he's behind Skeens and Merrill, but let me tell you, if he had a better first 2 months of his career, of the season, I think he's right up in there, and I think he wins it if he plays like this. His first 2 months were extremely poor, which makes sense. He's a 20-year-old getting his first crack at the big leagues. Like it was a process, and here he is figuring it out. And how much time you got? Because I could talk all day about Jackson Chourio and just the strides he's made as a 20-year-old. So he's done everything you want to see. I mean, the results are one thing, to see the results that he's putting up, but just to see the way that he's grown as a hitter and as a player, as a defender, as a base runner throughout his first year is insane. He's cut his chase rate. He's cut his strikeout rate. You know, he sliders away where his Achilles heel earlier in the season. You know, when it was 2 strikes, he was getting a slider away and he was swinging at it. He's completely altered his approach. He's been much more patient. And he just his bat has lightning quickness where he can put the ball in play. If there's a runner on second, 2 outs, you need a ball in play. He can also hit one 450 to dead center, as we saw the other day in Milwaukee, took out the scoreboard. So he just has so many skills to him. He's also extremely fast. He's not a known outfielder, and yet he's still putting up solid results in the outfield. He's just, the strides he's made has been incredible. And I think, like I said, if he had a good first 2 months of the season, I think he'd be right there in there. He'd be winning it. The slow start kind of hurt him. And obviously Merrill is more than deserving. Skeens is more than deserving. But I think he finishes probably third when all is said and done in Rookie of the Year voting.
But in Milwaukee, he's the best Jackson. That's
Yes.
guaranteed.
Yeah.
And we were talking about brothers before. If Milwaukee ends up going out and acquiring Trevor's brother Tyler, okay, you do that. And then maybe you make a deal with the Cleveland Guardians and you can get Jackson's brother Jason. So maybe this will happen. Again, this is another one to put a pin in.
Hey, it's definitely it's definitely possible. You got the opportunities. It's just a matter if they go out and execute the plan,
This was a fun one. You've probably seen this. You know it all in the Brewers world. But on September call-up, they promoted a 28-year-old outfielder, so fourth outfield type. Okay, good story. Gentleman's name, it's actually his middle name, but he goes by Brewer Hinklin. Only the third player in baseball history to have a first name that matches his team's nickname. The only others, Angel Moreno for the Los Angeles Angels in 1981 to 82, and Jay Jackson for the Toronto Blue Jays in 2023. So believe it or not, the Jays could have a ton more Jay players, but no. And Jason Nix and Jason Worth do not count. So it got me thinking, okay, first off, are there any Rockies that play? Or I should say any players named Rocky that play right now in baseball? And there hasn't been one in a couple years. There is a prospect in the Mets system, Dominican Summer League guy, 17-year-old Rocky Solano. But Rocky, the name is spelled with a Y and not an I-E. So I don't know if that would count. If Jason doesn't count for J, even if you spell it Jayson, help me out here. Help me out, Joey.
I think it's got to be. I think it's got to be IE. I think it's got to be. I don't think it can be with a Y. Which you might be waiting a pretty long time if you're waiting for a Rocky with a Y. But it doesn't hurt to go. Maybe they need to go out and create Rocky with an IE and see if it counts. See if it qualifies.
I think you're right. I think you're right. By the rules, it has to be ROCKIE and not a Y. And yeah, that's not a name. That's Rocky is always just with a Y, right?
It's a bummer.
Yeah, maybe there's some kid in the Colorado, Rocky Mountain region that is named Rocco and goes by Rocky, but chooses to spell it like the team.
Hey, that would count. Exactly.
We can hope. We can always hope for that. Joey, this has been great. Thanks for jumping in and giving us the breakdown on the Milwaukee Brewers this weekend and kind of what to expect. The unexpected is probably what Rockies fans need to expect because, again, they're not household names, but this is an organization that continues to churn out a ton of really good players, a ton of top caliber big leaguers, and there's a reason why they might be one of the first teams that ends up clinching their division. And maybe they even get a first-round bye. They got a way to go. I think they're third on the depth chart with behind the Dodgers and Phillies. But Joey, go ahead and plug away where people can find all your content at.
Yeah, you can find my work over at justbaseball.com on xjpeterson12_17. You can find me on over there. And yeah, no, this was a pleasure. I'm excited for the upcoming series this weekend. I always love talking some Brewers baseball. And I appreciate the invite onto the show.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Joey. If you're listening out there, head over to the YouTube channel, Rockies Insider. Make sure you're liking, subscribing to the podcast as well, and leave a review at Patrick D. Lyons, at Patrick D. Lyons MLB on most social media platforms, at Rockies_Insider. Joey, thank you for this bit of momentum, a lot of momentum going into the weekend. But unfortunately, that momentum, it's really only as good as my next show. So, of course, I'll talk to you.